The Red River Farm Network is excited to celebrate women in agriculture during this promotion, Agricult-HER, made possible by the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council. Our guest is Kristie Sundeen, pioneer field agronomist. And first of all, just to kind of let people know, of course, we've done videos with you throughout the growing seasons here and talked a lot about different crops in North Dakota, Minnesota, but now we get to learn a little bit more about you and your history with agriculture. How did you grow into that industry, into this industry?
So that's kind of complicated. So I graduated from high school and I went to University of Minnesota Crookston. And when I went there, I was double majoring. I was doing equine industries management and ag business. After one semester, I realized that I love horses, but I didn't want to spend my life with horses. And there's not a lot of money to be made in horses. So I moved basically strictly into ag business. And with agricultural business, there's a lot of open electives. So I kind of fell into the agronomy side of things. I started taking some agronomy classes and I really enjoyed it and liked it. I started taking and doing internships in the agronomy side. And I kind of just fell in love with it and kind of evolved after that. And I have a bachelor's in ag business and I have associates in agronomy. So agronomy and in-field has kind of been where I've gone since then.
And so you grew up on a farm. Where was that? What did your childhood kind of look like?
So I grew up in Langdon, Tacoma, North Dakota area, up in the Canoa capital area. I grew up on a farm. I did not do a lot on the farm though. Most people don't realize that, but I didn't. I didn't have an interest in running the tractor. That kind of really still isn't where my interest lies. I'd like to be out in the field looking at the crop and telling somebody what to do and what I want them to plant and how much fertilizer to use and chemical and everything else, but I don't want to be the actual one operating the equipment. So that's kind of where my interest went from there. So my dad was really surprised actually with what I went to school for. But I've been successful with it and I really enjoyed it. I've worked in retail. So when I graduated, I was in retail for a couple of years. I ran my own business for 7.5. I was an independent crop consultant. And then my husband's self-employed, he's a farmer. So two self-employed people in the same house really wasn't working anymore. So I went to work for a major manufacturer. So I worked for Bayer and then I got traded to BASF and now I'm with Pioneer.
So what does your role look like? What do you do in a day? Of course, different seasons mean different things in agriculture, and that's hard to do a typical day in the life. But just in the growing season, maybe what does your typical day look like? And then maybe pick an off season. What are you doing? Talking with producers right now this time of year.
So in season, obviously, we work in seed. So in season starts when the seed starts going out the door. I help with plot planting. We work with cooperators and some of our sales reps, so we do plot planting. Most of the summer is spent for me evaluating the plots and the products that are in the plots, because we always typically have 1 or 2 new products that are coming to market. We see them in our PKP plots first before we're really selling them commercially to growers. So it's really about evaluating those, looking for the traits and the package that works and where it's going to fit and be successful, and then basically helping the reps with that. During the summer then too, I also deal with service calls. So whenever there's an issue out in the field and obviously we think there's something wrong and first thing we think is seed, which is fine. I get called out into the field quite a bit to deal with some of those issues or replant issues. So it's really about evaluating what's going on in the field. I think of myself sometimes as a little bit of a detective, and I'm stubborn. So I don't really like to let it go until I know actually what happened. Like, it could take me weeks to figure out what happened, but I really want to know what happened, because once you know it and you spent all that time, then the next time it happens, you know the answer. Like, you don't have to research and try to figure out what it was. So I spend time doing that, and then also training our reps. So training them about the products, making sure they understand the products and where the products fit so that they can sell it to the grower. And then basically it's harvest time. So we're harvesting those plots. We're doing ride-alongs with customers sometimes. I don't do a lot of that. The reps do more of that, but I do a lot with the harvest. And part of my job in the harvest is also collecting all the data. So last year I have 2 territories, and last year I think I had over 100 plots in my territory. So it's about bringing all that data in, putting it into our system, and then having a forward-facing document to the farmer that is interesting and it's something they want to read. And then basically that's used for sales material. So I also help build sales material. There's a little bit of marketing on that side of things, which I enjoy. And then putting together presentations for winter crop shops, spring crop shops, any conversations that we're having. Yeah, that's kind of, there's a lot, but it's not the same thing all the time. So I think that's one of the things I like about it most.
And you cover a really wide, broad area of North Dakota and Minnesota. Kind of paint that map for us.
So think of kind of Rolla to Rugby down to Harvey. And then going towards the Minnesota side, I draw north of Highway 2 about the Michigan area. And then I'm up north of Highway 2 all the way to Minnesota, and I cover like Black Duck, Minnesota, which is over by Bemidji, and then up to Roseau. So it's pretty big geography, fairly diverse. There's valley in there, there's more drought-prone areas in there. There's a lot of differences from one end of my territory to the other.
So you talked about your upbringing and kind of your interest of agronomy sparked in college more than anything. Talk about your role models. Who are those people for you that kind of set up where you're at now and the path that you're on?
So I would say in college, my advisor, who actually I work with now, he's on the Pioneer team. So he was probably one of the first role models I had. He was very good at giving advice and answering questions that I had, especially about the direction that I wanted to go with my career and what to look for. And then coming out of college, there was a few along the way. Jason Hansen, I knew him when I was fresh out of college, so he was with Agri-Alliance at the time. Super knowledgeable. Like, everything he said agronomy wise, you just tended to soak in, and he was always highly energetic about it. So from a learning standpoint, he was probably one of those. And then probably my first major boss with a major manufacturer, so Mark Hogland with Bayer. He's the best boss I've ever had. No offense to any bosses I have now, but he was the best boss I've ever had. I mean, his ability to give you critique and feedback without it feeling like, I don't know how to describe it. Like you didn't take offense to anything, and he was very good at giving the feedback and helping you find the path that worked. And also being accepting. You know, when you work for some of these larger companies and corporations, you know, they're all about helping you find that career path. And sometimes that career path is, well, upward and onward. And then there's some of us that we're okay where we're at. Like I don't ever want to move. You know, my husband farms, so I can't really move. And I'm happy with where I'm at. So it's more about giving you the education that you want along the way than in preparing you for maybe a different role within the company. And there's always roles open. I mean, there's always opportunities within these companies, but being accepting of kind of what you want and then being okay with that. So I think at the base of it all, my mom was probably my biggest proponent in terms of a role model. She did a lot on the farm. So she ran combine, she was in the tractor. So she was, you know, I kind of learned through her that I can do anything. That it really didn't matter that I was a girl, that if I wanted to do it, I could do it. She tells me now that I've surpassed her and that she needs me to give her confidence to go out and do some things. But I think she's probably the one that gave me the most in terms of the confidence to go do it.
All right, and talk about some memorable experiences that you've had throughout your career, through growing up, some kind of anecdotes, maybe some challenges that you had to overcome and some successes that way.
Oh, gosh. So there's some things I can't say. For the most part, I will say that I was never put in a position where I felt like being a girl was a bad thing. Now, where there's some situations that were uncomfortable and probably more grower facing, especially when I was younger, especially when you're in your 20s and you're not married. There's a lot of things that came up then, but you learned. I guess, you learned not to put yourself in those situations. And it's bad that you have to change how you do things so you're not in those situations. But it never held me back from continuing on. Like, it never gave me the impression that I shouldn't be doing this or that I shouldn't be in this industry or anything like that. So I've had a few of those experiences that were very interesting. I'm not going to say the things that were said, but I extradited myself from those situations and I learned from them, I guess, at the end of the day. In terms of stories, I would say that ag is a very small world. And when I say that is, how I got positions that I do have now, it was all about networking. When I decided to get out of crop consulting and getting to a different job that was a little bit more stable, it was a college friend that kind of got he mentioned a job to me, I applied for it. He's not the reason I got it, but you network, you learn things, you know where things are posted. Same thing how I got my job with Pioneer, actually. Actually, somebody within Pioneer ended up visiting with my husband and said, hey, is she happy? And it's like, no. So, I mean, ag is just a really small world, so don't burn bridges. Like, yes, stand up for yourself. Yes, put boundaries out there if you need boundaries. But also know that sometimes it's you that has to make the changes, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just learning how to navigate things if they're difficult and asking people for help, because there's tons of people within the ag industry that are more than willing to help and step up and help you get through a situation if you're in a bad situation.
And I feel like you kind of alluded to this a little bit already, but sometimes you serve as a mentor even if you're not necessarily aware. So what advice would you give to other women in agriculture, other people that are working toward a career in agriculture?
Be honest on what you want out of life, okay? I mean, I knew I wanted to get married. I knew I wanted to have kids. And, the reason I left retail, I left retail is because I couldn't put those hours in. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's retail. Retail is about the hours that you put in. And unfortunately, sometimes as females, we can't do those hours. Now, if my husband didn't farm and he was a 9 to 5, then yeah, I could work those hours. And it would have been possible because my husband's very, very supportive. But it's about being honest about what you want. And then realizing that maybe you can't have everything at this moment, but that doesn't mean that 4 years from now or 5 years from now that you can't have it. My kids are growing up. I can do a lot more. When I started with Bayer, I was traveling a lot. I was on a plane sometimes once a month and I'd be gone for 3 or 4 days. That was challenging. I mean, I had 2 small kids at the time, so my husband had to step up, which it's possible, but we also had supporting families. So they made it possible. So for me, my advice is just be honest about what you want and realize that sometimes you outgrow your job and it's okay to make the switch to something different. That doesn't mean you've given up. I struggled when I gave up my crop consulting business because I built it. It was mine. But I realized for myself and for my family that long term, it really wasn't what I wanted. And it was okay to give that business up and go a different direction.
All right, so any final thoughts, any other things that you want to touch on, talk about here before we let you go, as far as, things that you're excited about for the future in your career or in life, and maybe other things you're involved in the community or different organizations that are really important to you?
So I'm on a couple boards. I've been actively involved in North Dakota Farm Bureau for quite a few years. I've actually been president of Nelson County Farm Bureau for, I think, over 10 years now. I've been trying to hand that off to somebody else, but they don't want it. But be involved in boards. From a small community, I think we struggle a lot with, it's always the same people on the boards. I like to have new people where you get different ideas and different perspectives. You also learn how to operate in those boards. You know, if you ever want to move up and be on Northern Canola Board, you want to be on the Soybean Council or anything like that. Sometimes it's as easy as starting small in the community, and then you'll gain confidence and then go for it. Like, you can't have change happen if you're not actively participating. Like, I think the biggest thing I always tell my kids and even people, if they're, I don't want to call it complaining, but don't like the way things are, if you're not actively participating to make those changes, it's not going to change. Like, you have to be a part to do it. And yes, it's exhausting. It is. But that's for me where I want to stay active. Like, I want to be involved, because if I'm not involved, then I feel like I can't help make things better. Because at the end of the day, we can always make things better, no matter what the situation is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Again, Kristie Sundeen here, helping us celebrate women in agriculture. Again, thank you to Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council for making this celebration possible.